Hey, all you Ethicuties, how's it going? Welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think fixing our workplace can fix our world, we got a real treat for you today. I know I say that sometimes, but I really actually mean it today. We got the one and only Allison Taylor, one of my all-time faves. How's it going, Allison?
It's going great. It's good to see you, Nick.
So Allison teaches ethics, sustainability, and professional responsibility to MBA and EMBA students at NYU Stern. She is the author of one of my favorite books. And we are going to be diving deep in this session with a really cool vantage point about what critical talent questions we need to be asking in this profession. So as we get started, I always love to hear where everybody is coming in from every day. What are you doing to celebrate the big win over England? Just kidding. 250 years ago. What are you doing to celebrate the big win for the USA team last night? And what are we doing over the 4th of July weekend? There's going to be a lot of inflammation, hopefully, over the weekend as we, pig out a little bit. If you're here for credits, this is the place to be. We have credits for SHRM, CCB, and HRCI. And we are, of course, giving away this book that's still flying off the shelves, okay? International bestseller, Higher Ground by the one and only Allison Taylor, our absolutely phenomenal guest for today. If you have not downloaded the Ethico benchmark report, I encourage you to do that. There's a lot of great information in it. I'm going to keep talking about it until 100% of you have downloaded it and digested it. There's so many insights that you can get from cutting your data in some different ways. Our job is to make better bets with the limited resources we have to find those hotspots in our organization to drive that impact forward. So there's a lot of great ideas and a lot of great tips in the benchmark report. And we have a brand new tool for you that's for free because we love you so much. On the console, you should be able to reach this cool page that allows you to put some information in about your business, about your industry, your company size, and so forth. And it's going to rip out a bunch of policies for you so you can see what some of those gaps might be in your own policies. And you can download those to go ahead and get yourself started. And we, of course, launched this because as an accompaniment to Policy Plus. This is our new AI-driven policy platform. So AI does the work. Your team makes the decisions. The policy management process is one that is very messy in many cases. A lot of things are able to slip through the cracks because there's so much complexity built into that. And so Policy Plus is a brand new platform that helps you to streamline that process and really make sure nothing is falling through the cracks. You can track acknowledgements. You can do drafting directly inside the application. You can find all those approvals and you can manage all those exceptions along the way. So if you're interested in Policy Plus, which you should be, I'd encourage you to check that out. And I also want you to get your red marker out and start circling on your wall calendar July 23rd. On July 23rd, we have Ethics Day 3.0. We have 4 phenomenal sessions. Drop into the chat which one you are most excited about. We have a bunch of great sessions. We have the one and only Dan Ariely, who wrote one of my favorite all-time books, Predictably Irrational, coming on, along with our good friend Christian Hunt. And we're going to be talking about behavioral science, how we can really leverage that. We're going to have a knockdown, drag-out, blood sport AI debate with the one and only Reed Blackman. We have some DOJ insiders coming along with Matt Kelly. We have a great conversation with Wei Chen in that session as well. And then finally, we're going to be wrapping the day up with the great women in compliance. So if you miss it, you're going to miss out on the biggest and best record-breaking ethics and compliance event of the year. So you are not going to want to miss it. All right, with that, let's get a massive emoji explosion for the one and only Allison Taylor. Allison, so glad you are back on the show. You know, every time we have a conversation, I always leave feeling a little bit smarter, and I'm just so glad to have you. What's new and exciting on your end?
Oh, it's a delight to be here as always. I've been on the road for the last month. I was in Mexico City speaking at a fraud and corruption conference, and then I was in Barcelona and Copenhagen, and I just got back, and it's boiling hot, and it's July the 4th, and I'm very happy to be home, and it's summertime, and swimming and hiking and growing things, a little bit of time to think maybe, that would be nice. So in a very good mood and lovely to be here.
I love it. So you teach ethics and responsibility to MBA students at Stern every single week. I just want to kind of set the stage and really dive in here because I think you have a unique perspective because you're kind of up close with this sort of next generation that's going to be entering our industry. What do you think is like the most surprising thing about this generation, how they think about ethical businesses as compared to when you started?
Oh God. I mean, I think I've been teaching now, I think it's my 9th year teaching. And so ideas about ethics and responsibility have completely transformed during that time. I teach a sustainability elective, which I don't think should be the focus here, but I also teach the required ethics class. And in fact, I'm taking over this summer as course lead for the required ethics class. So I'm going to be transforming this course. I think probably the main thing that has changed or has become more mainstream is when my students think about ethics, or when I ask them to describe something unethical, they might not be talking about traditional risk and compliance topics. They're likely to go a lot broader. They're likely to talk about environmental responsibility or inclusion or culture or leadership, or topics that are a little bit, out of the kind of fraud, bribery, and corruption kind of core of the risk and compliance function. I'm in a business school, not a law school, but I certainly teach lots of people that have worked in compliance functions, most often in pharmaceuticals or banking, but a lot broader. And so, part of what we're trying to do is to prepare everybody, whether or not you're in one of those control functions or not, to be able to understand and navigate these topics.
Do you think that creates an opportunity or a threat for current compliance departments? Is that as this new generation sort of has blurred the lines between, as you said, sort of that core, FCPA, those kind of like core pillars of a compliance program or an ethics program, and sort of broadened it to some of these more sort of tangential things? What opportunity and threat does that sort of pose to the corporate compliance officer who's sort of looking forward on how their program needs to maybe grow and evolve over time?
Such a good question. I mean, I don't know what the latest research is out of the US, but I don't know if you read the Nordic Business Ethics Alliance report from a few months ago that sort of suggested there's been a little bit of a retrenchment and a little bit of the kind of going back to basics in the compliance field at the moment. So I think I'm going to go ahead and say, I think if you take that direction, it's somewhat of a mistake. Obviously, and I'm sure you've discussed this on many, many episodes, one thing that we can see out there is that regulation is becoming more internationally inconsistent and uncertain. So you can no longer rely on an assumption that everything is broadly heading in the same direction. You're navigating inconsistency and in some cases, direct contradictions in laws and regulations. So it might feel as if the more risk-averse way to respond to that is like, let's go down to what's legally required and not try and be more ambitious. But I think the opportunity of the moment is to position yourselves in the organization as someone more strategic, that is thinking about these kind of strategic questions that are at the intersection of regulation and politics and social impact and culture. Right. And I think there is a huge opportunity for the right ethics leader to be more than, you're someone the CEO delegates a lot of policies to so he doesn't have to worry about them, but someone that is really his right hand, voice as he or she starts to navigate all these really, really, really difficult issues. There was a really interesting article a few weeks ago in Bloomberg sort of talking about how much being a CEO sucks today, apart from the salary, more people burning out, incredible stress, actually security threats, expectations of what you have to take on rising and rising. And honestly, I think a lot of CEOs need a more strategic, ethical voice to help them with some of that. And so for the leaders that can step up, I think there's probably never been such a good opportunity to reposition the ethics function and to reposition ethics leaders inside the organization.
I love how you put that. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I love how you put that, though. There's an opportunity there for the right leader to kind of step up and reposition their role, their impact in the organization. And, I always think that every threat has an sort of equal and opposite opportunity, and that article you're referring to creates a massive opportunity for exactly what you're talking about. The level of complexity continues to increase, the pressure from investors, the pressure from the board on those executives or on the business itself continues to increase as well. And we in the ethics and compliance space have this really unique, to your point, this really unique vantage point that maybe is not sort of top of mind for some of those executives who are dealing with the burnout and dealing with these, other challenges and dealing with their board and so forth. And so being able to help them see around the curve or to bring that unique perspective can do a lot to alleviate some of those pressures or to really, to your point, be that right-hand voice. I love that angle. That's something though, I think a lot of what you're saying is probably like resonating with a lot of, our audience right now. But I feel like sometimes we don't have a way to get started on that kind of a path of repositioning. What would you tell someone, like how they should start, or what should they start kind of thinking about to start to elevate from that thing where you just kind of, it's like a delegation box for policies, as you said, to something that is sort of that right hand?
I mean, I think there's a lot of potential jumping off points. One is what's going on in organizational culture, but I think the most obvious jumping off point, right, is AI. So every CEO I've spoken to recently is under enormous pressure, usually from the board, often from investors, to implement AI as quickly as possible, to cost cut, to show, gains, to kind of get this embedded and kind of drive efficiency and profitability. And, at the same time, I think we're starting to see real and concrete signs of a rising backlash from the workforce and from local communities. So there's a lot of resistance to data centers. There's incredible data showing that 44% of Gen Z are resisting the AI rollout in some way, either by not doing the training or not using the tools, or maybe putting confidential information into LLMs. And I think that we're just starting to see the beginning of this backlash, which interestingly is quite bipartisan. And there's a kind of collective realization that unless we enable employees to experiment and come up with things that actually work, then none of these tools are going to work in a vacuum. And so that, I think, immediately centers the ethics and compliance function. You need guardrails, you need governance, you need an understanding of which of these tools you can and can't use, and you need to provide employees with some sense of trust that they're not just training some bot to take over their job, but there's actually going to be an understanding of how work gets done, how do we think about roles and responsibilities, what can we do without, what can we not do without. And so, in other words, unless you've got firm governance, guardrails, and trust in place, you're not going to have the innovation, you're not going to have the creativity, you're not going to have the competitive advantage, and you're not going to have a culture where the rollout of these tools is happening in a sustainable way. And so it's just one example. I could give you a million other examples, but every CEO in the known universe is struggling with this particular issue right now, and trying to wonder what to do. They know it's not just about kind of policies. They know it's not just about top-down pressure and cheerleading. We're starting to see all this noise and backlash. So if I'm a compliance officer, I'm stepping in and I'm like, let me help you.
Well, and you said a critical word. So I love that angle. I think, kind of coming in on that sort of AI tangent can do a lot to elevate, because to your point, everybody is talking about it. They've been talking about it, but it seems like, everything kind of grows little by little and all at once. And it feels like we're sort of at the all at once, stage. Every article is talking about it. You know what I'm saying? There's this tremendous pressure at that sort of, at that tier of, CEOs bragging about the savings that they've gotten. And then everyone feels like they're behind and they're trying to drive this adoption. And you said kind of like a critical operative word there, which is like trust. There's this sort of, bipartisan backlash across the stakeholders that these tools are being rolled out to. And it's not being adopted at the rate that, CEO who with his, mighty pen sort of issues the decree. It's not being adopted at the rate that's going to lead to, the impact, the profitability improvements, whatever, that they expect. And it probably is rooted in trust, as you said, and an ethics and compliance department or an ethics and compliance officer should be sort of the trust expert in the organization and have their finger on the pulse of what's going on with the workforce and what is, every business right now. I mean, they're not all robots yet, right? Like every business right now is a bunch of humans that are collectively, pursuing some organizational mission, and that effort that they expend is it's voluntary, right? Like that's not compulsory. They choose to show up every day and they choose to expend sort of marginal effort on whatever the project du jour is. And if we can provide a little bit of insight to leadership about the sort of state of trust or like that sort of the temperature of the environment, so to speak, we can do a lot to kind of elevate from that sort of bucket that just, policies and things get delegated to something that's truly that strategic lever in the organization. And you and I have talked for years about this sort of concept, and I'm seeing more and more compliance folks start to think about their role in this kind of a way. And I just think this angle that you talked about is very, I don't know, it's a smart angle. It's something that you can really leap forward on. Back to what I was saying at the start of this episode, I want to really kind of pick your brain a little bit more about, because you're so close to, the next generation that's coming out of academia. And I want to kind of like understand that generation a lot, because pretty soon our entire, all of our organizations are going to be infected. Just kidding. They're going to be full of this next generation. And you did something where you kind of road tested your book in the classroom. And I'd love to hear how that kind of shaped your view of like where our profession is heading in general.
So, where the profession might be heading and should be heading might be two different things. But I think, the onus is on me in the classroom to teach students to think in a broader and more systemic way. Like, everybody pretty much walks in thinking that ethics is a problem with either bad companies and bad business models or bad people, and that there are good or bad people. I am more ethical. There are these unethical people. And so a lot of the way to teach people is to kind of have a little bit of humility that we're all flawed, we're all influenced by each other, to also understand that when it comes to ethics, like it's very simplistic to just say, do the right thing. You've got to provide tools and lenses. What the right thing is looks very different from different angles. So I think there's also something about like harnessing collective intelligence. So for example, I give students a scenario where you're a public health official and you've got to decide how you're going to roll out a vaccine among different kind of populations. And they have to kind of explore this through different philosophical lenses. Like, what would you do if you were taking a utilitarian lens, or you were being kind of caring, or you were prioritizing medical workers, or that kind of thing. And the point is to get them in a room and debate and understand that you might have a very strong gut reaction about what the right thing is to do. Listen to your colleagues, like understand if you're having a values disagreement, it's probably not that the other person's unethical and you're ethical. It's probably, that people are arguing using a different philosophy, a different argument, a different lens. So there is something about learning to listen and something about making decisions using the wisdom of the collective that I think is really, really important. And then I think the other thing is, if you know the situational psychological vulnerabilities that everybody can fall into, you are less likely to fall into them yourself.
So, it's like the best things are always so simple, like sliced bread. It's just bread that's cut, and what you're talking about is really like getting that sort of mental, dexterity, or that sort of mental flexibility to be able to step into different worldviews, essentially, or different sort of philosophical frames, to increase the likelihood that whatever you put out as a department or as a person is going to just have like a higher hit rate. That's going to drive the behavior change that is, intended to happen. I think it's difficult, right? It's a difficult thing because you have that gut reaction. Everybody thinks that they themselves are ethical. It's not everyone's like initial instinct to like be able to just kind of go through the cards of different philosophical lenses that the constituent group might be sort of looking at the world through. But there's so much opportunity in that. How?
Yeah, there's such it's a simple thing you can teach, and people will get it quite intuitively, but you will, to sort of prime people to sort of think about your gut instinct about what is the right thing to do, and then go and debate it with a bunch of your colleagues. You will discover they have completely different views of what the right thing is to do. And so even that awareness, even understanding the value of that conversation, listening to stakeholders, drawing on the collective, making decisions that way, it's so powerful and so simple. So that kind of thing is a joy to teach, because it always works like a dream.
Yeah, and it's probably so many, like, you can sort of see ostensibly these light bulbs going off in people's minds, and it starts to build that kind of that kind of muscle memory, or that kind of an instinct. I think it's sometimes difficult from a compliance perspective or an ethics department perspective to have that kind of, how do I say it? Like, I use this example, I've used this example in the past. Like, if you go on Disney Plus and you watch a kids show, Disney always wants you to go to their parks. You know what I'm saying? If you watch a kids show, there's a commercial before the movie or whatever that's clearly geared toward the children. So kind of, get them to ask their parents to take them. If you watch, an adult movie on that channel, there's also an ad that's just for the parents, and showing these, memorable moments, these memories that you're making with your kids. Very different ads, very different audiences with the same sort of intended outcome. And I think sometimes we just want to kind of make one message and send it out and kind of cross our fingers that it hit, that it hits and it drives that behavior. But to your point, spending a little bit of time having some debate, or getting doing that kind of road test that you've done with your book with, a diverse group of people within our organization is probably going to uncover some of the things that you're talking about. And again, increase the likelihood that whatever messaging or whatever initiative we're doing is going to land a little bit better.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, I think there's just a lot going on that is really, really can be useful in real life if you think a little bit more broadly. I just taught a class as well in Copenhagen to a bunch of executives on high stakes ethical decision making. So everybody, they were MBA students, they had to come with a real life ethical challenge they were grappling with, and we all collectively worked through these challenges over the 2 days using different lenses and frameworks, and in the end they had to write a decision memo, defend it in the room, make a recommendation, and then we all tried to think of the best counter arguments, and they left with something they can use on Monday morning to navigate this incredibly difficult decision. So that's the kind of thing where I think we're not maybe spending the time and the training and the kind of offsite capital that I believe is extremely effective.
So what was surprising about that session, either for you or like, what did you kind of consistently see across the participants in that 2-day session that was kind of surprising for them?
So they weren't in general in ethics or sustainability functions. They walked in, all of them, thinking this was a bunch of jargon and buzzwords, and they were suspicious, and they sort of thought this is PR and it's kind of meaningless, and what are we even doing, and what does ethics mean? And then they left, I think, understanding that these things can be taught, these things can be very, very practical. We should not let each other get away with easy answers. And again, what I was trying to demonstrate in real time was that the wisdom of the collective in kind of, if we take certain lenses, if I give them certain frameworks, we can collectively solve 19 profound organizational challenges or decisions where there are high stakes, where stakeholders disagree, where the right thing to do is not clear. So I think it's sort of, the law doesn't provide a guide to that. Certainly sustainability frameworks and what we used to call ESG doesn't provide a guide to that, but give students lenses and tools and the ability to debate and recognize that this stuff is tough, and you can get to answers. Yeah,
and they're probably not the answer that you thought it was going to be when you're sitting alone in in front of your computer. There's always going to be some more dimension to it,
100%.
So, I'm just kind of fascinated by this like 44% AI backlash that's coming from this new generation. You have a bunch of presumably people of that generation that you're that you're teaching. Can we kind of like, can you help me understand how that sort of backlash is showing up, like in the classroom or among that group? And like, what is it rooted in? Is it rooted in a sort of a self-preservation thing? Is it rooted in a sustainability thing? Is it just doesn't feel right for them? Like, help us get into the mind of that generation around this new technology that seems to be getting like rammed down everybody's throat.
Well, I think, yeah, you just said it, like rammed out. So what I find quite funny is there is quite a lot of broad AI skepticism and resistance, but they sure will all use it to write their papers. So we've got to kind of, it's kind of the same thing on fast fashion, right? We all care really deeply about fast fashion. We're also shopping at Cheyenne. So you see the skepticism. I think, there's so much noise about, how hard it is now going to be to start your career or the entry-level layoffs. Everybody, all my students, and I work in a prestigious business school, are having hard time getting internships, hard time getting their first job.
Right.
Even the post-MBAs are finding that the job market is really tough. There's a whole conversation about, is a human being even reading my CV? So people putting in hundreds of applicants. Is anyone even looking at it? How do you position yourself? How do you navigate this world where you're kind of being told that all your next opportunities are disappearing? And that is all real. And it drives a lot of concern and a lot of anxiety. At the same time, as a teacher, I have to work really, really hard to keep AI and to keep internet access out of my classroom. And one of the things I'm working on this summer is in fact completely reorganizing this required course for the age of AI, because getting people to write 4 papers is not these days as valuable as it used to be. I have seen the standard of the written work, particularly amongst my undergrads over the past few years, like the papers I graded this spring versus 2 years ago, they're so much better. And that's because of AI. So we need to completely change how we teach and evaluate. And this is sort of a good metaphor for organizations, right? I feel like what's going on in academia is the same as what's going on in a lot of organizations. You've kind of got a lot of use AI in the classroom and we've got to adapt to AI. But what we've actually got to do is rethink the purpose of education and everything about how we teach and evaluate. That's harder than rolling out a bunch of AI tools. Similarly, we can pressure everybody to use AI from the top, but what we've actually got to think about is how work gets done. What do we need humans for? What do we not need humans for? And so on. And so I see a lot of analogies between what's going on in universities and what's going on in private sector organizations.
That's so interesting. I never thought about what you just said there. It's like there's no magic bullets. There's no like magic wand. You can't just like wave an AI and then now everybody is now smarter or the business is better. You have to rethink all these things. And so this new technology really kind of does create sort of an equal and opposite like load of work. Like to rethink evaluation in an academic setting, that's extreme. That's a massive battleship to move. And rethinking kind of how work is done, as you said, inside an organization, that is a very, that's an extremely complex thing. That's not just, cool, I have now some AI agents that I can, delete some hourly workers from the business.
Right. Run 10 agents and everything will be okay. No, and I mean, so to get more specific, right, I can change evaluation in the classroom. That is almost certainly going to be far more labor intensive for me. What I am hearing from managers at the moment is that AI is not necessarily making their jobs easier. There's more volume. I don't know if you read the amazing HBR article on work slot, right? So there's more and more stuff landing in your inbox that looks like an awesome deck, looks like a great report. It sort of feels really articulate. And when you dig in an inch and you start being like, well, is this backed up? What are these sources? Does this person that created this deck actually know what they're talking about? That's more work, like double checking whether there's any substance behind this thing. And so I somewhat, especially at the manager level, not clear that this actually is the efficiency driver, at least at this stage of evolution, one might imagine. What it's actually doing is kind of flooding the zone with a lot of stuff that you've then got to check for accuracy. So in both cases, like my workload's getting better and worse rather, and so are managers.
Right. That slop issue is such a huge issue. How do you go through, like you said before, the quality of writing has gone up. And maybe at some level you're like, wow, I'm a better teacher than I even thought.
Yeah,
And then you're
best
like,
teacher ever, yeah.
wait, there's too many M dashes in this thing.
Right.
This is clearly AI work. How are you processing that information? Like how are you grading? Are you AIing your grading?
No. I mean, I think that's kind of unforgivable unless I want to end up like being, oh, what's the point of me if I'm not reading the papers?
Yeah, exactly. So, you got to hold some value for sure. I saw this video last night of. Okay. I saw a video on TikTok last night of a TA who was showing how he's using AI to grade papers, and this thing is scanning to see, is it AI written? And then it was also scanning like how quickly from the metadata or something from the Google Doc, how quickly the student was typing. And if it was typing too fast, if that document was created too fast, that was another indicator. You know, it's like there are now these tools. It's like kind of these AIs battling AIs. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's crazy. It's a totally crazy time. Did you happen to see that that video that came out yesterday? I think it was on CNBC, where the Palantir CEO was having his nervous breakdown. Did you see that 20-minute interview?
No, but I will
absolutely
look it up
need to watch
it.
It's absolutely worth a watch, but you know, it feels like we're at this sort of phase. You know, again, 2 years ago, these large language models were coming out, and there was, you know, this a lot of hype around like what the future is going to be, and we're seeing sort of pockets of that, and we're reading articles about that. You know, New York Times or Wall Street Journal articles about the gains that XYZ company has made. From, you know, leveraging AI and driving more efficiency and so forth. Nobody kind of warned us about these sort of negative externalities that have come along with the technology. And it feels like we're kind of getting to this point where people are starting to sort of question in mass at sort of an aggregate aggregate market level what some of these claims are, and if they're actually going to be real, and if they're going to be sustainable. Never mind, you know, I want to have these sustainability conversations separately. But it was interesting to hear the CEO of Palantir, which is essentially an AI company, an AI harness company, talking about kind of how some of his, you know, frontier model competitors are really kind of overhyping this thing, and sort of voicing some of the conversations that he's had in private, where there's a lot of, you know, executives and CEOs who are starting to question the viability of these investments, and if these are actually going to be needle movers for us.
Absolutely. And, you know, we've got all these companies that got to make money, and it's kind of not clear how a lot of them are going to make money. This is also now propping up the stock market. So, you know, I think we're entering, and it's kind of like what happened with social media, but the cycle is so fast. We're entering a new phase, it feels like, in this conversation, where I think a lot of CEOs, as we said earlier, pressured by boards, pressured by investors, get these tools, lay people off, demonstrate these productivity gains. And now I think there's a bit, you know, and I don't want to, I think another thing that's unhelpful, right, is there's a pro and anti quite binary conversation. Like, this stuff's here, we've got to figure it out. But now we're in much more of a phase of like, okay, but how? Okay, but where are we going next? You know, it's not as simple as we've said already. You don't just bolt on the tools and everything works any more than you bolt on a compliance program and anything works. You know, this is all about integration and all about adoption. And at the end of the day, it's a lot about trust.
Yes. Great transition. Are you looking at my notes here? No. During the ESG era, there was a time where every webinar was talking about ESG. Like today, every webinar is talking about AI, remember? And you were kind of like the lone voice in the wilderness, is what it seemed like, talking about this risk that ESG, if we don't sort of take advantage of this thing appropriately, this can just turn into greenwashing. It can, you know, I'm probably botching this thing, but this sort of sentiment that, like, you know, don't put 35 different things in your ESG plan. Focus on the few things that you can actually do right, that you can actually, you know, if you're making these claims, like, be able to actually back them up, and don't let it turn into a marketing document. Well, lo and behold, it turned into a marketing document, essentially. You saw a lot of sort of greenwashing, you know, through these ESG programs. And now I only hear it when I'm bringing it up to tell this anecdote. Are there some lessons from that era, which, you know, I don't feel like ever became what we hoped it sort of could be, from a sustainability or just like a general sort of ethics improving sort of, you know, point of leverage in our organizations. Is what lessons can we sort of learn from that? I'll just kind of call it a failed experiment that we can bring into this current era where again this sort of theme of trust keeps coming up again and again.
Yeah, I mean, I think the era was sort of characterized by we can't trust the government, so the private sector is going to solve all these societal problems. And I don't think we can promise or market or PR our way into solving systemic societal problems. So companies got into over-promising. Companies got into having too many goals on too many things. Companies read a lot of very sort of shallow data. I don't think the political context was fully accounted for and understood. I think public opinion's more divided and idiosyncratic on these topics than was anticipated. And so, the backlash has been the backlash. Now we're in a sort of era where I think everyone's decided they don't need to do anything. But, it's not true you needed to do everything 5 years ago. And now it's not true you need to do nothing. I think we're in this era now of integration, legitimacy, leverage, of focusing on how your business makes money. And also thinking in a much more kind of fundamental way about how you get these kind of considerations and decisions baked into the business. And all of that is missing at the headline level. So we sort of oversold it in 2019. Now we're over backlashing. But I think the path forward is through legitimacy and leverage and understanding that your company is part of wider political, environmental, social systems. It's not the same thing as saying you've got to solve every problem out there.
Great. Man, see, I told you all this was going to be a good one. We're barely halfway through, and it's just been one home run after the next from you, Allison. I want to talk a little bit about like this generational thing because I just feel like, well, I don't want to lead the witness here. Do you think that like this redefinition or this expanded definition of what is ethical or sort of this trust issue that is way more idiosyncratic than maybe it was kind of in the last sort of era, like, is this a problem for our profession? And if it's not a problem, how do we kind of execute on taking advantage of the opportunity?
I think it's a problem for every profession. It's certainly a problem for sustainability. But here's something we haven't got into that I find super fascinating. Like, so the Gen Z students I teach come in, they're pretty nihilistic, they're pretty cynical, they're difficult to impress. They'll bring up, oh, well, that's just corruption and political spending and monopolies, and we can't do anything about it, and it's all going to burn. And so they come in with a pretty dark mindset. And so even giving them a kind of sense of empowerment and tools that they can change things is a really big job. The other thing that I think is directly the result of what we just talked about, so the over-promising, we all remember the George Floyd era. We all know where we are now. All my students remember. So they are obsessed with authenticity. I hear the word performative. That's just performative. The company doesn't mean it. Every session. So there's an exhaustion with greenwashing. No one believes anything. I think really young people are really, really good at reading and kind of unpacking when a company is making empty claims. They're very focused on kind of, does this company mean it under the hood? They are going to get together on Slack and leak stuff to the press. If they don't like what you're doing, they're not necessarily going to call the hotline. And then they will say, I'd rather a company had a wrong opinion and was consistent, or an opinion I disagree with and was consistent, than flip-flopped. So what they hate, they can remember everybody making these claims 5 years ago, and now that they're making opposite claims, that's what they don't like. The kind of flip-flopping depending on who's in government and who's in power, and kind of crafting your message around like shallow engagement metrics. They want to see that you mean it, and they want to measure and understand whether you are quote unquote authentic. And that is something that is completely new to me. Like I hear that, but I hear that so consistently in the classroom, and I didn't hear it 5 years ago. Well,
and there's kind of a through line back to that message that you had, one of those messages that you had during that ESG era, where you were kind of saying the same thing. You were saying, like, if you're going to make these claims, they should be authentic claims, and they should be claims that you're actually going to make good on. They shouldn't just be a bunch of, vanity metrics or something like that. And again, back to your advice at the beginning of this episode, where you were talking about, there's an opportunity for an ethics and compliance officer of the future to really elevate their role and provide a perspective to a stressed out, CEO, giving this kind of perspective on the workforce and really trying to help the organization lean into that authenticity and not be this sort of flip-flopper, can really have a lot of impact on the bottom line, on the enterprise value. I'm saying on the things that, like, the CEO cares about, but it takes some kind of agency. It takes some chutzpah or some sort of confidence or some boldness to go into those conversations and steer them in a way that it needs to go, as opposed to the way it's sort of gone for the last 10 or 15 years.
Right. And just to be concrete, and I'm not saying to anyone listening this is easy to pull off, but I have a dear friend in Europe who is in a senior role. She's in the executive committee. She's head of ethics and compliance. She's head of sustainability. She may take over corporate affairs very, very soon. And that is, as a result of a number of trends, right? ESG or sustainability is clearly heading in one direction in the US, but it is getting more regulated. There is more disclosure. There is more regulation. There's lots of anti-greenwashing action in both Asia and Europe. Many companies need to think globally in a world where these kind of issues are heading in really different directions. So there's a need for rigor. There is a need to be clear that you're not greenwashing. So that's given her the first opportunity to kind of take over and own ESG reporting and understand how these claims fit in with legal obligations. And then I think the other thing that's going on, right, is you can't just treat communication as communication. If you're out there saying something sunny and nice and it's not mirrored by your policies and procedures and what your HR team is doing and what your employees experience and what voluntary commitments you're making, that messaging is going to be a real problem. So I think there's even an opportunity for an ethics leader to get more involvement in how the company communicates, what it communicates, and just being clear that we're not saying something that we kind of can't back up internally. So some of my friends are hoovering up a lot of functions and getting a lot more kind of a broad strategic role. I'm not saying that's going to work for everybody, but I'm just putting it out there that the need to think across functions and think strategically is real, and it's happening.
And what do you think the sort of like catalyst is for those friends of yours that are hoovering up these other functions, or, increasing the surface, area of their intersection points with other departments? Is that sort of coming from their own sort of initiative? Is that somebody above them kind of tapping them and saying, you probably have a unique perspective, maybe you can take this on? Like, have you seen any trend in that?
I mean, I think you certainly need to position yourself in a certain way and go to the CEO with questions that are really keeping him up at night, excuse me, and not, not kind of pitch these things in a vacuum. Right. But I think many CEOs right now are struggling with that kind of international thing, So in Europe, the public still wants a certain thing. Employees still want a certain thing. You're still seeing loads of kind of commitments there. In the US, you've got the opposite perspective. So who in the organization can help me with the messaging, with the positioning, with the legal risk, with the reputational exposure, when I can't rely on having the same consistent message globally, right, or the same commitments globally? So I feel like CEOs are looking around and being like, holy fuck, excuse my language, but who's going to help me with this? Who's going to help me navigate this extremely fraught? I mean, we use the words like disruption and turbulence and resilience, and we sort of overuse these words. That is resulting in very concrete strategic dilemmas, and there's not an obvious function right now to take those on. So right, if you've got the position to make the case, that function could be the ethics function.
Well, I mean, there's this kind of, so much of what we're talking about is kind of like picking up a shape and sort of looking at it from these different angles. We're talking about authenticity. We were talking about, those exercises that you've done where you're considering different audiences and different sort of philosophical lenses in order to increase the likelihood that, your message or the decision is going to be sort of more resonant, right? I've always thought that the ethics and compliance department should be we're very much this unique function in the organization because we touch so many different departments. We're this sort of circulatory system. And I think if our job is to drive, at least create the conditions for more compliant, more ethical behavior, well, that entails us having a deep understanding for what it takes to influence behavior. And thus it takes a deep understanding into how to, how human behavior works. And so, what you described about, all this complexity and this turbulence and sort of these strategic headwinds that these dynamics create, it seems like it's kind of purpose built for our function to really kind of step up, assuming that we have those sort of requisite skills and those requisite insights to help the organization not sort of step into the bear trap of inauthenticity or performative messaging that ends up kind of sapping a lot of that employee engagement at the end of the day.
100%. Yeah. And I think all of this, though, requires a certain level of confidence and willingness to go beyond the traditional remit. And that, that might not be easy. That relies on you having political capital. I'm also, I'm giving a lot of advice and you may be like, well, my team's getting cut. Like I've already got too much to do, partly because of this regulatory inconsistency. So, I think this is also a very challenging time to be in this function. And I don't want to downplay that either.
Well, I do. Just kidding. So Amanda has said, Amanda said something great here. Hey, Amanda, thanks for this. Oh, no, she did say this. Oh, no, Michelle did. Amanda, your comments have been great as well. But Michelle said, the older generation tends to think that the board and the CEO should set the ethical tone for the business. It sounds like the younger generation is going to lean more to an ethical or to an ethics expert or trusted professional to guide that group based on the company profile, business plan, and culture. And then Grace asked this question: do you believe or suggest that organizations are entering a period where trust itself must be, should be or must be redesigned? The way that we convey trust or the way that we build trust, that function itself needs to be redesigned.
Yeah. On trust, I feel like we've conflated trust and reputation, and they're not the same thing. Like you can't rely on people responding in a logical way. You might get blamed for something that isn't your fault. You might get away with something that is your fault. Like the idea that the public is going to respond in some linear, fair way and give you a good reputation in response to a good effort, that's gone. So you can't anchor trust or reputation anymore. You've got to think about what trust actually is. I can't remember the other question. What was the other question? It was good as well.
Just kind of, how do we sort of like re-engineer this trust mechanism? You were kind of drawing the distinction between reputation and trust. And I think you're right? Like there's a lot of people running companies right now that, let's just say on average, they're baby boomers. There was a certain deference to, there was a certain deference from that generation to organizations, right? Like that I don't think really exists in sort of some of these other, generations that have come up behind them. And, everybody suffers from this, like everyone's like me bias. And I think applying what worked for that generation, that had that sort of inherent deference for, authority and for, I know there's a lot of rebels. Okay. So don't at me. Okay. But I'm just saying, like, from a broad perspective, there's a different attunement, to your point, that these new generations have for authenticity that maybe other, at least the greatest generation didn't have, right? They were listening to, doctors on commercials saying that Lucky Strikes were the best cigarettes. Okay. And they're like, I think we should switch to Luckies. Okay. So there's a different sort of ear for that kind of a thing. And I think organizations run the risk of like falling behind on building this new sort of trust mechanism or this new trust muscle as these new, more skeptical, more cynical, as you said, generations are coming in. So how do we start to like rebuild that trust generating function?
Yeah. So, and here's the other thing that's going on that's super interesting. Like there's, as we know, the backlash to the ESG era, and during the ESG era, we had younger board members with different skills that were more diverse. We're galloping in the US in the opposite direction. board members over 70 are like back in play.
Right.
Hiring people that were ex-CEOs and ex-CFOs are back in play. And that is for good reason. You know, these really stressed out CEOs are like, man, it's chaotic out there. Let's get a safe pair of hands that's been through this, that's got a lot of experience. And, you know, you can understand why that's going on. The problem is those people have got experience, but it's not experience in the new landscape. It's not experience in the kind of political turbulence you're seeing in the US, certainly not an experience in the mindset of younger generations. Often, I think, a lack of confidence and understanding of technology and AI.
Totally.
So we're getting the sort of safe pair of hands steering the ship direction from the board, but we're missing a completely different kind of worldview and perception and way, you know, approach to activism, approach to blowing the whistle, that maybe these boards and CEOs are actually do not have the experience to navigate. So that's again where I think, and I think that was the question, right? Where I think the job of an effective ethics leader is not just to provide those kind of board and fiduciary guardrails, but also to some degree, like reflect what's coming from the bottom and suggest constructive ways to handle that. So I think we're missing something at the top, or we're like thinking that if we just go back to the 20th century, everything will be great because we've got some safe, experienced pairs of hands. And I only know about this obsession with authenticity and the mindset of younger generations because I live in the classroom. Otherwise, I wouldn't know what the hell's going on with those people. So we need to have some sort of listening function and trust building that is not the over-promising and kind of over-committing of a few years ago, but is something a little bit more authentic and a little bit more organizationally driven.
Yeah, and like a little more kind of contemporary or a little bit more kind of finger on the pulse, you know? I mean, to your point, you know, the average age of a, you know, Fortune 500 board member is much older than like the average age of even the executive suite, you know what I mean? And like
100%.
the rate of boomer AI slop on Facebook is indicative of, like, there's a lot of stuff that gets on Facebook that people are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe Donald Trump said that, or I don't know, whatever the most ridiculous thing you've ever seen is. And they don't have an eye for that kind of thing. And so you have sort of that sort of quote unquote steady hand, to your point, that steady hand at the ship that is sort of out of touch with with the true dynamics that are necessary for trust building, which is really kind of the linchpin of all this. That's kind of the mortar and the wall of the organization that really is going to lead to, you know, sorry to be cynical, maybe I am a Gen Zer at the end of the day. It's going to lead to, I think, organizations playing catch up again and trying to be all things to all people and like down, you know, deep, you know, kind of doing this sort of performative authenticity, which everybody can kind of see through at scale.
100%. And I think the other thing that's missing in younger there's not necessarily the respect for hierarchy or authority that they used to be. So if you've got a bunch of people at the top being like, well, we'll just roll out the initiative and we'll cascade down the incentives and command and control and just implement AI, that is going to fail because this is not a generation that has been brought up to think we should respect leaders and respect hierarchy. It's a generation that's like, what are you going to do for me? Are you going to manage my well-being? Are you going to mentor me? I don't see why I should like overwork if it's not in my contract. I've had kids in the classroom that are like, yeah, I just went and my contract said I shouldn't work after 5 p.m. I'm not working after 5 p.m. And that's so different from a like over-prepared, motivated millennial, right? So that's the other thing. We've got 5 generations at least in the workforce. They all, it's hard, you know, I don't want to get too far into generational stereotypes. I mean, to your point about boomers on Facebook, like there's all this noise about young people and, you know, not being able to tell what the truth is and not being able to concentrate. Well, I can't concentrate. So these tools are kind of affecting everybody, but we've got, without wishing to overgeneralize about generations, we have 5 different generational worldviews in the organization at the moment who have very different views about leadership, culture, the right thing to do, and what is ethical. Again, I think huge opportunity for the right ethics leader.
Yeah, and you know, we're not going to be able to clean up the whole world, right? No single one of us is going to be able to clean up the whole world, but we can start in our little corner of the world, and we can drive some impact forward that can, you know, have, you know, a positive a positive impact on our business or on our team or whatever. You brought up something before that I just want to circle back to. I love having you on the show because we can just kind of goes where it goes, and it's all interesting. But you were talking about the struggle, and there were some comments kind of echoing this in the chat. But the struggle with people coming out of school and not being able to find jobs, and sort of not being able to find internships because all those things have been AI'd. What do you think that's going to do to like our workforce when this sort of apprenticeship sort of layer is kind of all but being sort of deleted right now? In my first job, I was doing essentially what's AI work now, right? Like I was putting together presentations and doing analyses that I would pass to my boss, and he would have me do them over again, or she would have me make a bunch of changes to a PowerPoint presentation. And just kind of being around the fire gave me some warmth. I learned a lot just kind of being around those folks. And then I think about people who had that job during COVID, where they're now doing that job in an apartment instead of being in the office late at night. Where so much kind of that, I don't know, whatever, like that sort of incidental learning happens. How much worse now when that opportunity is not even there? Like, what is that going to do to the future? Is that going to just create more of a chasm, or what's the kind of near-term implication of that?
Yeah, so lots of questions, right, about remote work, lots of questions about how remote work gets done, and lots of questions about managers. Like, I do think we've got a tendency we promote people because they sell a lot or have a lot of technical knowledge. We're not teaching people how to be good human managers. So I guess where I go with this is that an organization that still understands that investing in your junior people is worthwhile will win over the long term versus an organization that's just kind of cutting off that pipeline. That all said, they're kind of tricky. I've got someone else in my inbox right now who is hiring for a cool job that's a like creator, social media kind of job, and he can't get a Gen Z to show up and be proactive and have the social skills and the commitment to stay. So I've got this interesting thing in my inbox at the moment where I'm flooded with students like can't find an opportunity, don't know what to do. And then I've got someone else who's a millennial saying, I've got this cool opportunity and I can't keep people or find people that are proactive and committed and organized and will ask questions. So we've got some big gap here. And I think the way to fill that is by thinking really seriously about management and leadership as a profession, understanding what mentorship needs, understanding that you've got to train critical thinking. You can't just be like, hey, 21-year-old, go and manage a load of agents. They won't have the background knowledge and critical thinking to know when what these agents are generating is true and useful or not. And so there need to be a few organizations that are like, we are going to get the best young people and we're going to build this pipeline and we're going to value people because that will benefit us over the long term. And we're not just going to kind of respond in a knee-jerk way to what the short-term dynamics look like right now. I think you've really got to have a steady nerve and ignore some of the sort of social pressure and FOMO and kind of galloping into implementation that we're seeing everywhere. Just stop. Like, the tools are getting better and better and better every day. Like, you don't actually necessarily need to roll out this version. There'll be a better version in a month. Like, just pause and ask the right questions and think a little bit more deeply. And maybe you'll skip over a lot of kind of churn and get to the right answer quicker.
Yeah, there's like this like frenetic FOMO to your point. That's just like creating all of this, this kind of anxiety really is what it is. I was at a conference and this guy gets up there and he's doing his talk, and he was talking about how, a couple of weeks ago, or maybe, when school was ending, there were a couple of videos of, somebody giving a commencement speech or something. And they brought out AI and would just get kind of booed off the stage. And so he was referencing that, and he was saying, if you don't, if AI can take your value, then you don't have any value, and he was like, all this AI concern is so overblown. And I was just like, I was looking for a rotten tomato to throw at the guy, because it was like, it's like, how about a little bit of empathy for the people, like those jobs, those internship jobs, those apprentice jobs, those low-level jobs that we all took that got us up our J curve in all of our careers.
Got it.
If those are eliminating, that's the rope bridge that gets you from sort of academia into the real world. And that rope bridge has been cut. And so kind of to your point,
Got it.
you have to be a little bit more intentional and a little bit more long-term thinking, because it's easy to get caught up in the short-termism and just fall into this haphazard mess that seems to be like rippling across so many organizations.
We've just also got to be a little bit clearer about the value that human beings provide, because if it's just calculation and analysis and compute and productivity, there becomes a point where these tools will be so good, no human being is going to be better than that. But judgment, critical thinking, relationships, trust, there's also, leadership, there's all sorts of stuff that these tools are never going to be able to do. So we've got to think about that. And yeah, to your second point, or you're exactly right. Like, you would have noticed this. You put something in Claude that you know inside out, and you're like, not really Claude. If you don't know a topic, you're like, oh, amazing. And so we've got to teach young people to have that judgment that we develop not by using Claude, or they will never be able to work effectively with these tools. And to say, well, you don't have any value if you just haven't been able to develop that experience yet is not the solution. No.
Right. You would have been throwing a tomato with me, believe me. All right, let's get a massive round. Let's get a massive round of applause for the one and only Allison Taylor. Allison, you are always such an absolute treat. If you did not win a book today, you should definitely Control-T, Command-T on a Mac, go to Amazon, buy this book. You will not be disappointed. Thank you so much for joining us, Allison. It's always so much fun, and we always leave so much smarter. If you also want to get a little bit smarter, next Tuesday we have episode 4 of the Ethicsverse MBA. We've talked about a number of different things. Last episode, episode 3, which you can find on the YouTube channel, we were talking about strategy. How do we as compliance better connect to strategy? On episode 4, we're going to be talking about navigating the sales floor and the revenue engine. That's one that you are not going to want to miss. And then next Thursday, we're talking about algorithmic antitrust. How do you like that? Love you all. Thank you all. Amazing. Have a wonderful weekend. See you later, Allison.
Take care. Talk to you soon.